Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for another restful episode of true, scary stories to help you fall asleep. Today, we are going to be reading true home invasion horror stories. I hope you enjoy them. Also, because of the type of content that is going to be in these stories, I do want to give a trigger warning. Not that there's going to be any foul language or anything of that nature, but due to the nature of home invasion stories and the potential self-defense actions that could follow, these stories may be a little bit graphic, so viewer discretion is advised. But for now, without further ado, lay back, relax, and enjoy these true, scary stories. A couple of weeks before my 19th birthday, I woke up one morning around 4 a.m. while someone was trying to break down my bedroom door. I had fallen asleep with my light on after coming in tired from work, so when they came in my room, I could at least see what was happening. Not that it helped much at first. There were two guys, and one of them immediately attacked me with a hammer, so I told them to just take whatever they wanted. The other guy started to load all of my electronics into a backpack. Meanwhile, my mother down the hallway had woken up with the commotion and started shouting to know what was going on, staying in her room at least. Next moment, they both ran out of my room and shut the door on the way out, going to my mother's room. She managed to hold the door closed on them for a few seconds, giving me time to open the safe in my cupboard, 6-digit key code that I amazingly input correctly on the first try, and I removed my pistol. I checked for a round in the chamber and went to open the door to make my way to my mother's room. As I opened the door, one of the guys turned around and ran at me with a hammer. I fired 2 shots before he could get to me and pushed me back into my room and onto my bed, where he held me down and tried to take my pistol, while the other guy started to cut my arm and head with what turned out to be one of my mother's own kitchen knives. My mother eventually joined the fray and managed to take the knife away from the guy cutting me. Meanwhile, I was just holding on to the pistol with everything I had in me, because I knew that if one of them got control of the firearm, my mother and I would be dead. My mother froze after she took the knife away, and the guy got up, grabbing my DVD player and knocked my TV to the ground, then hit me over the head with the DVD player. By this time, I managed to sort of wrestle my gun hand free, and I shouted to my mother to get out of the way for me to try and get off another shot. She rolled off of the bed, and I managed to turn the gun enough to get a shot off into the guy on top of me. It was then that they decided to bolt, and grabbed my bag of electronics on the way out. When the cops came, they found a body with 2 gunshot wounds in my garden a few meters away from the house, and a blood trail leading away where it disappeared at a nearby road. When I was a kid, about 10 years old, a group of passers-by threw a baseball into our yard. Someone in a white t-shirt, blue jeans, and a cowboy hat came into our yard, around the corner of our house, and into our side yard about 2 feet away from our house to get the ball. I watched this from the window and commented to my mother that I thought it was weird. As a kid, I had insomnia and would often get out of bed after everyone else was asleep and play computer games until I was tired. After my mom and my aunt went to sleep, right around the time I was getting into my thoughts and about to go use the computer, I heard some rustling outside my first floor bedroom window. It was a very tight neighborhood with houses only a dozen feet apart, so these sounds were very distinguishable from wind or other common noises. Being 10 or so, I was now glued to the noise. About 5 minutes later, I heard the basement door open. This door was about 6 feet away from my bedroom door. I heard slow footprints leading to the kitchen table, start shaking some pill bottles, and rustling some things on the table. I turned on my bedroom light and the noises stopped. I waited a minute, freaking out the whole time, before shutting off the light and watching the gap in the door carefully. About 10 minutes later, the standoff was broken by footsteps, and someone passed by my bedroom door into the dining room. I heard the sliding closet door open and rustling. I waited a while, got out of bed, and planned my break. I wanted to go through the dining room, up the stairs, and into my mother's bedroom. It took about 15 minutes to work up the nerve, but I finally ran for the stairs, flew up them instantly, and ran into my mother's bedroom. When I woke her up and told her what was going on, she didn't believe me. Not one bit. She gave me a pillow and a blanket, and I slept on the floor. I obviously didn't sleep at all. And about 20 minutes later, I heard the basement door open again. The next day, nothing was missing, and everyone thought that I was having a dream. I remember these things so vividly that to this day, 19 years later, I still believe that I scared off a burglar. I was so convinced of what I went through that about 6 months or so later, I had an episode where I thought there was another burglar, that I jumped out my window in the middle of the night and waited until morning to knock on my own front door to get back inside. That experience messed me up really bad, but I've since moved on, and we can all now enjoy the tale. It was one of the first times I was left home alone. Probably 13, I reckon. Chilling in the living room when I heard a set of ladders being put up on the side of my house. The side where I knew I left the bathroom window open. I grabbed a knife and hid behind a door and waited. I just waited and waited. I was freaking out, and I decided that it was time to vacate my house as soon as possible. I ran for the front door, and I saw the van for the builder who was installing our security lights at the time, and I realized I was safe. Fast forward to about 22 years old. I'm in my friend's flat in a really horrid area. I was playing virtual tennis on the PS3, and suddenly I had a spider sense. I paused the game and found myself wandering to the flat's front door. It was slightly ajar, and as I went to shut it, I saw an elbow briefly, which then sank into one of the rooms. I went feral and kicked the bedroom door open, screaming like a Viking. There was a really skinny junkie woman in the room asking for Frasier. I threw her out of the flat and spent the rest of the night losing at virtual tennis. One night in high school, I was studying for a major test and fell asleep on the living room couch. I shared a room with my snoring sister, so I don't study in our room that often. I woke up startled, and I saw a guy's face just a few inches from mine. I guess my mind wasn't fully awake yet because I didn't register that 1, there's a stranger inside the house. 2, my life is probably in danger. So we just stared at each other for a few seconds before he bolted out the front door. And that's when I screamed bloody murder. My dad and brothers came running to the living room, and I told them what happened through my hysterical crying. I was so freaked out. My brother called 911, while my other brother and dad went around the house, but they didn't find the guy. The police came, and it turns out the guy climbed up a tree beside our house and broke into the attic window. They never caught him, but we double locked that window and always left the lights on the porch and backyard ever since. It still makes me shudder to this day, thinking about what he could have done to me. I'm glad that he decided to just make a run for it. I was in bed asleep at 7 a.m. when I heard a loud bang. I thought nothing of it because of the large cat tree I have downstairs that's always getting knocked over. So I rolled over and tried to go back to sleep. Not long after, my elderly cat comes running into my bedroom, jumps up on the bed, and tries to hide under the blankets. This immediately woke me up because that old fat cat hadn't ran nor jumped on our bed for years. As I came to, I see 2 men coming up my stairs. At that point, it felt like time stopped, and I somehow ran incredibly fast at the same time. I jumped out of bed and started screaming, "Get out of my house." And I remembered thinking, while chasing these guys through my house and screaming again and again at the top of my lungs, that my voice actually sounds like my brother's, and I wonder how strange that was. I tackled one of them on my front lawn, but he struggled free and got away. I saw the getaway car and tried to keep repeating the license plate number, but it faded away in my mind as I was repeating it. I remember vividly being so mad at myself that I couldn't remember 7 numbers, and how stupid I was for not grabbing my phone. Looking back on the situation, there are so many things that happened that I never noticed, like how I fractured my arm slamming into the wall at the bottom of my stairs, and that I cut my feet up on the splintered wood of my front door. The adrenaline rush of a true fight-or-flight situation is something so strange that it's almost impossible to accurately describe. The sense of time, not being aware of pain and injuries for hours, and the hyper-focus on some details, but the complete loss of others. Luckily, I wasn't seriously hurt and nothing was stolen, but I installed cameras all over my house the very next day. About 10 years ago, some guy broke down my mom's front door at 2 a.m. The noise of it woke her up, and she came out of her bedroom and saw the guy messing with the papers on her desk, thinking that there was money there maybe. My mom's little dog was barking for all that he was worth, and my mom was yelling my name. The yelling and barking woke me up upstairs in the guest bedroom, so I came running down the stairs making a lot of noise. The guy ran off. Because of my mom? The barking dog? Me coming down the stairs? Who knows? I ran out onto the street after him, but he was gone. We called the cops. They showed up in less than 5 minutes. The officer was very nice. The next day, my mom got a new door with a longer deadbolt. It's a very quiet neighborhood. I haven't heard of such a thing happening to anyone else. I'm not sure if the guy was just crazy, at the wrong house, thought nobody was home, or something else. My boyfriend Jay and I were staying with 2 friends of his, Jam and Jeremy. Jeremy had left the apartment an hour or so before Jay and I decided to go to bed. A few minutes after Jay fell asleep, I heard a knock on the door and Jim answered it. Turns out it was Jeremy, but he wasn't alone. 2 guys that also lived in the apartment building forced Jeremy to knock at the door so that they could force their way in, as he didn't have his keys with him. Once they were inside, I could hear what sounded like a scuffle from where I was in the bedroom with the door closed. I woke Jay up, and all of a sudden we hear 2 unknown voices yelling, "Get down, get on the ground." Jay wanted to see what was going on, but I begged him to stay in the bedroom with me, which he did. After what seemed like a couple of minutes of arguing and fighting sounds, everything went absolutely silent. We opened the bedroom door to see Jim laying on the ground, with what we later found out to be a barbed machete sticking out of his chest. Jeremy was calling 911. The apartment building didn't have a buzzer to let anyone into the building, so when the police got there, Jay let them in and showed them to the suite that we were in. After they separated us all and put the 3 of us into the back of 3 different police cars, where they left us while the paramedics tried to save Jim. Unfortunately, they weren't able to save him. He died at the apartment. I knew that he was dead when the paramedics wheeled him out to the ambulance, but didn't leave for at least 5 minutes without working on him at all. The police took us to be questioned, again, keeping us separated the entire time. About 12 hours later, they were ready to let us go, but told us that we were not allowed to go back to the apartment, as it was an active crime scene. We were dropped off by the police at a coffee shop with no money, phones, wallets, or even shoes on our feet, as they wouldn't let us take anything from the apartment before they put us in the police cars before being questioned. We ended up going to a friend's house where we stayed until we were let back into the apartment 4 or 5 days later. Once we were finally allowed back into the apartment, the first thing that I had to do was clean up the blood, which I'm sure that you can imagine was pretty hard to handle. It was pretty traumatic. I was in college and had the only room on the ground floor. I was bartending, so I got home at like 3:30 a.m. I had just changed and gotten into bed when I heard someone fiddling with my window screen. I lived in a beach town and usually left my windows cracked open to hear the ocean as I fell asleep. I first thought it was one of my roommates who forgot their keys or something, but I realized that they would have called me first. So I flattened myself against the foot of my bed and the wall to look. It was a dude in a black hoodie with a box cutter cutting my window screen. As he was lifting himself to enter, I jumped up onto my bed and kicked him as hard as I could on the chest. He fell onto the parking lot, hit a bike rack, and was knocked unconscious. I slammed my window shut, bolted it, and called the cops. By the time they showed up, he was gone, but they found him 2 blocks away. His bag had zip ties and duct tape in it, and he had a record of SA. The cops blamed me a bit for having my windows open. I keep my windows shut after that. A guy who stalked me broke into my house with his buddy. I had a messed up sleep schedule, so I was awake at 3 or so a.m. I grabbed my little dog and my phone and went to the basement. It was more like a cellar almost, a trapdoor in the floor with stairs that led down to a small space with the furnace, hot water tank, etc. And I got my dog and I got into the crawl space. I'd had some cardboard on top of the door, so they didn't see it when it was closed. I turned my phone on silent and texted my best friend asking her to call the cops for me. After the longest 15 minutes of my life, the cops eventually got there, arrested the guy and his buddy, and came to find me. These 2 jerks had what the police described to me as a R-word and disposal kit. Duct tape, toys, a handsaw, a box of heavy-duty big black garbage bags, things of that nature, which implied intent and planning. So they went away for conspiracy to commit murder, conspiracy to commit assault, breaking and entering, and something else that I can't remember. The guy who actually stalked me pinned it all on his buddy, so the buddy went away for 5 years and is still in prison because he can't not act like a psycho, while the stalker served 2 3/4 years of his 4-year sentence. He threw his buddy under the bus and took a plea deal for himself, later got out on good behavior. I got a restraining order, which he violated a couple of times right away. It had been quiet for a while, until he got a girlfriend a couple of years ago. He told her his version, in which he was the victim and I was the villain who sent him to jail for nothing. So she sent me a long, nasty message telling me that she'd find me and make me pay for it. So predictably, the cops got to go talk to both of them, and I haven't heard from them since. This was about 4 years ago. For some reason, a few hours leading up to the event, I was feeling uneasy and on edge. This was 3 hours prior, and I even consciously thought that it was weird, because I had a buddy over and was playing my favorite video game, but I just could not enjoy myself. Unusually, my father was also up very late watching TV in the lounge, and he too later commented that he felt like he was being watched. Approximately an hour after he turned into bed, everything happened all at once. We believe at least 3 men tried to quietly pull a window out of our double doors. They were French-type doors to get in. But they dropped the pane, and when it shattered, everyone was alerted. Shouting, barking, and screaming commenced. And they then tried to break down the door to get in and grab anything convenient. Unfortunately for them, we had a large birdcage blocking the door on the inside, and they couldn't get in. They decided to make their getaway, and while doing so, one of them threw a brick at the window my father was looking through and broke that pane as well. While this was all going down, my buddy and I stayed in my room, door shut and locked. I grabbed a nearby skateboard, only thing I had that could be weaponized. It felt like everything was happening very slowly, especially because I could hear but not see what was going on. For reference, we have a freestanding house that, at the time, had an empty plot next door. We think they jumped over the concrete wall, as there's a palisade fencing in front of our house. A dude kicked the door in to beat up my roommate, who just got home from a late night of gambling. I was in the back and heard the commotion. I called 911, and they didn't take me seriously. "Can you just leave?" Until I said it sounded like someone was going to get murdered. The cops came. I was told to leave the house by the cops. I walked to the front of the house to greet some Glocks to my cell phone. Blood was everywhere. The floor, the walls, etc. The fight had broken windows and spread into the hallway and kitchen. I backed out of the house and was dragged across the yard by police. I told them I didn't see anyone in the house. They entered, and there was commotion when they found my roommate hiding next to his bed. The police were upset that I didn't see him. He was dragged out on a stretcher, and the neighbors watching probably figured that I beat the crap out of him. I was fixing the windows when he walked home from the hospital, still wearing a gown and hospital slippers. He didn't want to pay to be admitted. He looked like he had escaped an asylum. We never spoke about it after he repaired the damage. My tip? Just say murder when you call 911. A lot of police will come by. My dog scared off what I believe to be robbers and home invaders. I was at home cooking dinner one night, and I was about 8 months pregnant at the time. My husband had to work about 2 hours away from our home on this particular day. Anyways, as I was standing in our kitchen cooking, our dog suddenly got alarmed out of nowhere, and his hair raised on his back, and he was growling and barking. Well, next thing I know, someone knocked at our door. So I go to answer the door, and our dog stepped in front of me. As soon as I opened the door, our dog almost ran out in pure anger, but I held him back by his collar. There was a man standing on our porch. I asked, "Can I help you?" The man then said, "We're here to pick up the washer and dryer." After he said that, I looked in the driveway, and there was a tiny car no bigger than a Honda Civic out there. I immediately said, "There's no washer or dryer here for anyone to pick up." The man then said aggressively, "I told you, we're here to pick up the washer and dryer." Mind you, this whole time I'm having to hold back our dog by his collar. He knew something wasn't right, and so did I. I then said, "Sir, there is nothing here for you, so please leave." You could tell the man was getting more and more scared of our dog because he kept backing up. He then just turned around and walked to his car, and I could tell that there were multiple people in the car as well. I let go of my dog's collar and he stood on the porch, growling with his hair raised the entire time the guy was walking to his car. Then, when the guy got to his car, they all sat there for like 10 minutes and my dog never moved off the porch. He stayed there growling the whole time. By this time, I grabbed our shotgun that we kept by our door. They then drove off, and my dog came back inside with me and wouldn't leave my side. I called my husband in a panic, because what if they try and come back? My husband said that he was about 15 minutes away from the house, and that he was hurrying as fast as he could. Our dog truly saved mine and my baby's life. He was so protective, and I know if I would have let him go, he would have attacked this man without question. It was truly a scary experience. I wish our dog was still alive today, but he sadly passed away a year ago. He absolutely adored our son. This isn't my story, but it's a roommate's from a previous house. The roommate killed an intruder in his entryway. He had a guy walk up to the open door midday and walk into the house. Windows were large, and the guy could clearly see inside that my roommate and his adult sister were inside. He entered the house anyway. After confronting the guy, it became apparent that the guy wasn't confused and deliberately entered. The roommate tackled him and managed to pin him down through a struggle, yelled for his sister to grab a gun. Sister brought it back and he held it against the guy till the guy calmed down, with the guy fully aware that he had a gun pressed to his side. Roommate disentangles himself slowly and gets some distance, backing up 10 feet from the guy. Sister is calling the cops at this point. Guy stands up and faces my roommate, who's clearly pointing a gun at him. Guy gets aggressive again, starts moving towards my roommate and reaches into his jacket pocket. Roommate proceeds to unload and drop the guy on the spot. Police arrive and clear the situation. Shooting was ruled as self-defense and the roommate was cleared. I believe the guy was found to be heavily under the influence, but I'm not sure of what. Roommate ended up struggling heavily with PTSD from this event, as well as following events from the military. This is heavy stuff. This was one of the worst experiences of my life. 3 men broke in while I was at home with my husband. I was pregnant. I managed to keep the lounge door shut by putting myself against it. I had some bad bruises and damaged my wrist, but physically I was mostly okay. My husband got acid thrown in his face. Luckily, it only really caught his forehead. We both suffered terribly mentally afterwards. My husband, after having the acid thrown in his face, ran and locked himself in the bathroom. They were mostly focused on trying to get into the lounge where I was. I have no idea how I physically kept them out. It still shocks me to this day. I also managed to call the police and an ambulance while they were still in my home, but they left before the police arrived. They could hear me on the phone. They took some stuff from upstairs, but that was all. The police didn't believe us and didn't bother investigating the crime. The 3 men were never caught. I lived in the same home, and I really struggle with the fear of home invasion. All my doors are always double locked, and I'm very careful with windows. I was in bed and I heard something outside. I have a lot of vivid dreams, so I ignored it at first. But then he started using a screwdriver to get the window open. My bed was right next to the window. After realizing that this really was happening, remember, I woke up to this. I got up quietly and found my phone. I'm a small woman, so I didn't want him to see me. It was still dark and the blind was down, so I turned the torchlight on and stood against the wall opposite to the window, aiming the light directly at him. I held it up high so that I would look taller. I figured all he would see was the torchlight as soon as he got in, and sure enough, he got the window open, pushed the fly screen out, and lifted the blind to start climbing in. As soon as his head was through, I started shaking my phone so that he could see not only the light, but that someone was holding it. I was also banging on the wall, making the lowest, most guttural noise I could muster, like an ape. I don't know what came over me. I just knew he couldn't see me, and I had to overwhelm his senses so that he wouldn't notice my size and gender. And it worked. He let out an ungodly scream and ran. I think my behavior startled him. He left a bag behind that had a needle in it. I ran to my neighbor's house and called the police. They came and fingerprinted the place, took his bag, and left. And that's the end of the story. He never came back, and I never did get an update from the police. This is not my story. but it's a client that I used to work with. He was home with his daughter when 3 men broke in. He woke up when they broke a window. He put his daughter in his closet with his cell phone to call 911, and he got his shotgun. He crept to the top of the stairs since he could hear them all moving around and talking downstairs. He warned them that he had a gun and to get out. They replied that they also had guns, so he better run. So he fired, towards the ground as best as he could see in the dark. He hears screaming as his shot wasn't aimed low enough. He saw 2 shadows run away, but could still hear the screaming. His buck spray severed one of the men's legs off above the knee, and his buddies left him. The man bled out in his living room before an ambulance could arrive, despite him applying a tourniquet. Police arrive and separate him from his traumatized kid, and then arrest him. Kid had to go with a social worker until they released him the next day. They caught the other 2 the next day as well. My client was never the same knowing that he killed a man, despite knowing that he was protecting his daughter. This is not my case personally, but I was a prosecutor involved in a case where an older woman was about to take a shower when an intruder attacked her. This was back in the day when we had corded telephones. She started to try to call the police, and he grabbed her. She beat him in the head with the telephone, and then grabbed his family jewels, twisting very hard. He yelled, "Lady, you're killing me." And she yelled back, "What do you think you were trying to do to me?" He ran out of the house, and she got her pistol and started shooting at him. When the cops arrived, he ran to the police car yelling that crazy lady was trying to kill him. He was arrested and convicted. I was about 25 years old at the time, and I'm a female, and I was sick and at home in bed. I lived in a block of 8 units. It was about midday on a weekday. I heard my front door jiggle, and then it opened, and 2 big burly guys came in. I came to the door and said, "What the heck are you doing?" They said, "Oh, sorry. We thought this was our friend's house." I shut the door, but noticed that they had broken the lock and door handle to break in. I looked out the window, and they were standing outside my door arguing about whether to just come in my house anyway, which was horrifying as I was imagining being assaulted, etc. So I opened the door and screamed, "Leave, I've called the police," as loud as possible, and that made them run off. I then called the cops, and they showed up quickly but didn't find them. However, they had systematically robbed every single one of the 8 units. They had all been broken into. I got a call about 2 years later from the police saying they eventually caught the guys because they were found with stolen property from the other housing units, and they matched the description that I had given. My parents had gone out of town for the weekend. I was 16 at the time. We live in a pretty rural town of about 1,500 people. I was streaming my game and having a blast. I had ordered pizza and the night was going great. Now, ever since my parents would leave for weekends, I knew where my stepdad had a pistol, a Ruger 9mm. Whenever they'd leave, I felt safer having the pistol with me. So when this all first started, I learned and got trained in pistols. It's about 11:30 to 12 at night when I hear a loud bang and the floor beneath me shook. Coincidentally, there was a door to the basement below where my desk sat, so I calmly told my stream that I'd be back, grabbed the pistol, and flagged the door from our kitchen that led to the basement for about 5 minutes. Nobody came up, so I go to the basement door and really quietly open it up. I hear whispering and shuffling of things. I flicked the light onto the stairs of the basement and said, "I'm giving you until 10 to leave this house, or you're not gonna like the outcome." And it had turned pin drop silent. I started counting from 10, and once I hit 5, I racked the slide to chamber around, and as they heard that slide rack back, all I heard was shuffling and stuff being dropped, and they ran out the back door. I'm thankful they left, because I didn't want to shoot anybody, but I wasn't going to let someone steal from my family. Come to find out, it was a relative that was privy to my parents' departure and figured that I wouldn't be around. Someone tried our door after my brother had left around 11 p.m. on a Saturday. We thought they were drunk and maybe tried the wrong door. My girlfriend didn't see his face when she went through the peephole. We went to bed, but I grabbed a hammer before we went just to be safe. 2 minutes after the lights went out in our room, someone opened our front door. I jumped out of bed with the hammer in hand and charged the door. My girlfriend said she's never heard my voice sound so scary. I was hoarse the next day. It was wild. She barricaded herself and our dog in the bedroom and called 911, while I charged the door and body slammed it before they could get the whole way in. I felt him get pushed out. He must have thought my girlfriend was alone. Who knows how long he'd been watching us and her. It's unsettling that we never figured out who it was. A week later, we went back to try and get back to a routine, and at 10 p.m., someone threw something at our bedroom window. Cops are useless, and we moved out and broke our lease a week later. My wife and I sleep in separate rooms because I snore. I wake up at 3 a.m. to my wife frantically whispering that there was someone in the house. In fact, he was right across the hall in the bathroom, looking for pills perhaps. I told my wife to get our daughter and go lock themselves in our detached garage. I tried to sneak into the master bedroom to the gun safe, but the intruder looked over at me just as I passed the bathroom. I slammed the door in his face and sprinted into the bedroom. I have a pistol safe that opens very quickly with a keypad. He was coming out of the bathroom just as I racked the slide to put a round in the chamber. I told him to get back in the bathroom or I was going to shoot him in the face. He went back into the bathroom and I called 911. He played a little peekaboo at the bathroom door, but I told him if he did it again, I was going to shoot him. The police were there in a very few minutes. I was naked the whole time. Always leave a robe by your bed. I was in the process of cutting all contact with an abusive ex, and had been ignoring her for a week or so, and not responding to any messages. One night, I was in bed, about 7 beers deep, and someone starts banging on my door. I think, well, I'm not opening that. I didn't own a gun or anything at the time, and felt frozen just watching the door shake. I was on the 3rd floor of an apartment complex, and she jumped onto my balcony and smashed out the bottom part of the balcony door, window panes, with her shirt wrapped around her hand. I ran into the bathroom and put my back up against the toilet and my feet against the bathroom door, and the bathroom door was not one that locked. It was a cheap apartment complex and the doors were terrible. She's backing up to the furthest end of the living room and throwing her body weight against the door over and over, and I was just on the phone with the police giving them my information. And I guess the adrenaline gave me more strength than I really had. At the time, I was a 21-year-old woman with no muscles. Eventually, she realizes that I'm on the phone and changes her whole tone into this weird baby sweet voice and says, "Baby, who are you in there with? I'm not gonna hurt you." I responded and told her the police were coming, and she screamed this unhinged scream I've never heard another human make, and ran out into the parking lot where she was apprehended and arrested. She only stayed in jail for 2 days. Even though she was threatening violence that entire time, she was trying to get into the bathroom. The next day, she showed up at my apartment again and forced her way inside and held me captive for a day with a knife, and kept my phone on her person at all times so I couldn't call anyone. I got out of it by pretending that I had forgiven her and that we were still going to be together, but that she needed to go home and figure out her jail bond situation. It surprisingly worked, and I've never spoken to her again since I threatened her with a restraining order. You never think that you'll be one to freeze when someone is breaking in, but the panic just takes over and fight or flight kicks in hard. There also is this very real realization that you might have to kill someone if you initiate any type of self-defense. I think that's the main reason that I didn't fight back when she held me hostage. The idea of having to fight and possibly kill someone in self-defense was very difficult for me to act on. I lived in a studio apartment at the time. I came home from the bars to a random dude rifling through my stuff. I invited him to leave through the door. Instead, he decided to punch me in the face. Needless to say, this made me angry, and I proceeded to throw him around my apartment like a beach ball. After breaking most of my furniture and throwing him through the wall of my bathroom, I picked him up and chunked him out of the window head first. He got lucky and landed on his feet, shattering both of his legs. I lived on the 3rd story. Cops got called by my neighbors while this was happening. I got charged with defenestration. I pled the castle defense and got the charges dropped. He is still in a wheelchair. Side note, this event led me to getting sober, and I'm now 6 years clean and 3 years sober. I don't need the level of anger in my life that I used to have pretty consistently. I was absurdly lucky when this happened, 12 years ago. I was a single female, living in a ground floor flat on a private garden. I must have been targeted. The dude snapped the lock of the garden-facing windows and snuck in the middle of the night with a rucksack and what must have been a pocket full of condoms. I only know that because we found some on the ground in the home and in the garden. What he hadn't expected was that the day before, a friend of a friend had a pipe breaks in his flat and totally wrecked his place. Said friend called in a favor for his buddy, and I agreed to take him in. The dude was huge, red-headed, scarified, tattooed, psych nurse, and fun as heck. I set him a cot in my living room, the same room that had the garden-facing windows. When the wannabe intruder stumbled in, he wasn't faced by a scared, defenseless woman, but by a very startled, very angry, beefy dude who bellowed at him. I was woken up by my guardian angel, temporary roommate, a scream of terror from the invader, and the sound of said invader face-planting when he jumped the garden fence. Blood smears the morning after led me to hope he really hurt himself. Redhead tattooed guardian angel was welcome to stay as long as he needed after that, and I started to sleep with a machete behind my bedroom door. When I was staying with my brother, he let a mutual friend of ours stay there as well. He was selling weed and would constantly bring people by to sell to them, even though I told him repeatedly not to. One night, me and my brother were playing Borderlands when there was a knock at the door around midnight. I answered, and someone I didn't know asked for our friend who wasn't there. That's when someone who was standing on the side out of sight appeared and put a gun in my face. My first instinct was to grab the gun, and we both wrestled with it for a few seconds, and that's when I had 2 more guns shoved in my face. I had no choice but to back off. 4 people entered, one of whom had brass knuckles. They made me lay on my stomach. At one point, I felt someone come up behind me and I got hit with something. Not sure what it was, but it was probably a gun or the brass knuckles. I immediately tried to lift myself up to defend myself when I got knocked out. I still have the scar on my cheek. When I came to, they were gone, and my brother was standing there with a look of shock on his face, with blood on the back of his head. Those jerks hit him with a salsa jar, which caused him to get staples on the back of his head. I went to a neighbor's apartment and asked them to call the police. My brother was taken to the hospital. I still don't know who they were, but if I ever find out, That will be the last time they ever do some coward stuff like that again. This happened around 2011. I'm a female, and I was home alone getting ready to leave for work. I let the dogs out into the backyard while I put my shoes on and gathered things for my day. Our backyard's access from inside the house is through a door in the kitchen. The house is on a hill with a basement, so there's a staircase going down the side of the hill that brings you from the back door and deck to the full yard below. As a security measure, my dad had put the deadbolt key for the door onto a 3-foot-long chain, which was secured to the door frame opposite the side where the lock was. So I'd lock the deadbolt, then release the key, where it would swing down with the chain. I hope that makes sense. The key was still in the deadbolt after letting my dogs out, even though I locked it after letting them out, because it made the process for my morning quicker. Well, when I opened the back door to let the dogs in, there was a guy there who came from the side where the stairs are and pushed his way in. I'm literally fighting him about 4 feet into the kitchen. Luckily, he knocked into something on my counter, which fell to the tile floor and broke, because he then slipped and lost his balance. I was able to push him out of the still open door. I slammed it so fast and turned the key that was still in the deadbolt. I ran to the bathroom and called the police. They were at my house within like 5 minutes. The guy was gone, but an officer called me a month later because he wanted me to ID a guy who broke into the house of someone a few blocks over and was arrested for attempted R and assault. It turns out he lived 4 houses down from me, same street. He had watched my patterns, knew that my dogs were friendly, and knew the time that I would be leaving for work. I think I was 12 when this happened. I think it was like 2 a.m., and my dad was up still watching TV and heard rustling outside, which he initially thought were raccoons trying to get into the trash, which had been a recent issue. And then something tipped him off, because in his words, it sounded like it wasn't trying to be heard, and raccoons are persistent and don't care about that. He wakes my mother up, shushes her, then goes and wakes my brother, 18 years old, up. They quite literally lock and load shotguns, gun safe in Dad's closet, and he gets me my .22 as well. We basically just sit tight and try to spot the intruders in dim streetlight while my mom called 911 quietly. So here comes dude trying to brazenly blow through the back door of our house, and my father lets him get into another room, and then puts the shotgun to his back angled to an outside wall, while my brother is in front of him angling to the other outside wall, and I'm behind my dad with the .22, not aimed but ready to roll. The dude was tweaking, but he wasn't tweaking bad enough that he didn't realize that he messed up. So he just sat down on the floor and put his hands on his knees. We kept him there until the cops showed up, which was like 42 seconds, because surprise, dumb dude, there were like 7 cops who lived in my neighborhood. The clincher, as I recall, is the guy didn't have any weapons. None. Nothing. And we were the 4th house in our neighborhood who he had broken into, yet the first who was awake and heard it. I'm kind of the neighborhood mom. I have my own kids and I have a nice backyard with a swimming pool, and I always have the good snacks. I live in a neighborhood that is mixed social class, with some folks that are upper middle class a few streets up from me, and some folks in Section 8 a few streets down. I make up the border of in between. I'd say that we're lower middle class, not the poorest of poor, and we can cover a few minor car or appliance repairs where needed, but we'd probably be screwed if a big cash-requiring emergency happened. Sometimes the poorer neighborhood kids come over to swim in our Walmart pop-up pool. Sometimes they knock on our door and ask for snacks. Sometimes I notice their shoes are too small or falling apart, and I pick up a pair of shoes that might fit them better. One day, a few years ago, during the height of the George Floyd protests, 3 boys, 6, 8, and 15, started coming to my door every morning for breakfast. They'd play with my kids all day, eating lunch and dinner, playing in the pool, watching cartoons, and just hanging out. Then at night, they'd begrudgingly leave. They never answered questions about their parents, and their parents never seemed to come look for them or wonder where they were. They were always wearing the same clothes and swam in their underwear, and honestly, they smelled pretty awful. I bought them some new clothes and some soap and shampoos suitable for their hair and skin, and sent them up to shower and change one day. They then told me that their dad was an alcoholic and beat them and threw them out. I let them spend the night, and the next day I called a social worker friend of mine, and we took them to a local youth shelter. Their dad pitched a fit, and they were forced to come home, but then they were immediately thrown out again. They came back to my house, and I let them sleep here again. They started sneaking over every night that their dad threw them out. One day they ran to my house and banged on my door. I threw it open and was met with 3 bloodied kids. The 15-year-old had a head injury and a black eye and 2 broken fingers. One of the younger boys had a huge cut on his cheek and a bruise on his side, and the other had bruises all up and down his back. I brought them inside and locked the door. We called the police. They took 5.5 hours to respond. I sent the boys upstairs to the bathroom with my kids and told them to hide. I called my friends. For 5.5 hours, the boy's drunken, armed father tried to kick in my solid oak door. He screamed at my neighbors, calling me the P word. Thankfully, no one believed him, and eventually he split the door, just as the police showed up. I stood there in my living room, watching the door with my bow staff, while my friends stood outside, waiting and watching to make sure things were safe. I prayed to my grandmother's gods that I wouldn't have to use my staff, and prepared myself to try and calmly talk him down, but to do whatever I had to do to keep him from getting at the kids. He did manage to break my door, but the deadbolt and the latch lock thing held, so he didn't make it all the way in. The police didn't even arrest him. I was home in bed in our 2-story house with my wife at the time and my 11-year-old son. It was about 5 a.m. when the house alarm went off. I went into my son's room, realized that he was still in bed, and pulled him into our bedroom. I could hear someone downstairs breaking things and tearing the house up. I'm former military. I grabbed my shotgun and took a shooting stance, aiming down the upstairs hallway, loudly cracking the shotgun as my wife called 911. The whole time I yelled, "We're armed. Set foot on the stairs and I'll shoot you." It took the police about 2 minutes to arrive. Though the attackers had fled, they were quickly caught. All 3 were armed with pistols and had duct tape and box cutters on them. Turns out, these 3 had been on a crime spree, breaking into 2 other unoccupied houses that night and committing armed robbery in broad daylight earlier that afternoon. I've since upgraded to an AR-15. Not a day will go by that I am not armed. I had some dude banging on the bay window in the front yard. It was shaking the entire pane of glass, which was about 6 foot wide and 4 foot high. He banged it hard enough that the glass flexed inward and moved the curtains. He then came around to the door under the carport and tried to get inside. I argued with my ex-fiancée because she wanted to open the door and tell him to leave so he wouldn't smash the huge window pane. We rented, and I wanted to call the police. She opened the door anyway. He stormed in, shoved past her, and immediately attacked me, so I fought back. We tussled some and ended up on the floor, getting jammed in the corner of our dining room in a stalemate. Neither of us could move, and I had a death grip on his ear, but he had my finger and was bending it back nearly to the point of breaking it. We both struggled for an upper hand, but since we were stuck together in an awkward knot, neither of us could move enough. I pulled his ear and told him it only takes 11 pounds of pressure to tear an ear off of a human head, something I read once somewhere. He bit my finger back and told me that he'd snap it in half. Neither of us moved after that. We agreed to both let go, and untrustingly, we each relaxed our grip a little at a time until we untangled. His friend, who I recognized, barged in and shouted, "Let's get out of here, man." He jumped up and they both left. After, I started calling the cops, but my ex stopped me and said she knew him. She explained that she'd cheated on me and messed around with this guy, so now he was jealous. So yeah, that happened. When I was 9, I was down the street at my best friend's house. Her mom was quote unquote sick, which really meant blackout drunk, in bed, completely non-responsive. Before she went to bed, she had told us to make sure that we didn't answer the door under any circumstances. Easy, can do. We went upstairs to play Barbies or whatever. About 2 hours later, there's a knock at the door, and then another, and then louder knocking, and then it stops. We go back to playing until the back door opens and there are footsteps into the living room. She tells me her dad won't get off work until late that night. It can't be him. Her mom is passed out in bed. What do we do? My friend is really freaking out at this point. We were two 9-year-old girls, and she whispers, "My dad has a Glock in the closet." Bingo. To be fair, I had parents that took me to the gun range for about a year at that point, and I did riflery at camp every summer. But obviously this was dumb. We found the gun, loaded it, and crept downstairs to defend ourselves against the home invader. At this point, you might be wondering, couldn't they have called the police? Yes, but we were 9-year-old girls and we were lost in the sauce. Caught up in the moment. It happened so fast. I turned the corner with the gun, feeling like one of Charlie's Angels, ready to shoot the invader and literally kill someone if they came for me, only to find her grandmother making a sandwich. Her grandmother was planning on coming over, but in my friend's mom's drunken state, she had completely forgotten. I guess it's not a real home invasion, but 9-year-old me was ready to shoot, so I'd say that it's close. Thank you so much for listening to all of the stories in this video. I hope you enjoyed them. And I also hope that you enjoy the extra rain at the end. I hope you all get an excellent night's sleep. And I'll read to you in the next video. Good night, everybody.